I certainly wouldn't be drinking that. So for me, it's any of these single-use plastics that break down. It's also the leaching of the toxins into the foods. Styrene is a really big one for that as well. I really feel that we need to get rid of that stuff as quickly as possible.
Okay, and everyone agrees, but are we going to be able to do it? Because this, the idea of the trash aisles might sound like a bit of a joke, but in fact, the stuff in the oceans is becoming this new substance, isn't it, called plastiglomerate? You probably know far more about that than me. And we might actually end up with a floating land somewhere in the Pacific eventually. And are we going to be able to win this war?
I absolutely do. I mean, I think for researchers like myself who are working in this domain, we have to be hopeful. The things that I am concerned about is just how much these things, the plastics, get into our environment. We're starting to talk now about plastic in the rain. We're talking about plastics in sea salt. We're talking about plastics in our drinking water. It's literally in our air, and the concerns that we have now for microplastics getting into our lungs and our organs. So it's kind of all over the place. In terms of the marine environment, we know it's a major issue. When those microplastics get into our fish, it affects our fish stock, so it's going to eventually affect our aquaculture industry. We found that most of the fish we tested has been tested in New Zealand. Most of them have microplastics in them, so that's a concern.
And we've heard that so much, and yet we still are using the plastics. All right, so you sound optimistic, at least, Tricia. Thank you. That's Dr. Tricia Farrelly. It is nearly time to go. Before we do, we have such seasoned political former and present political operators on the panel today. It seems silly not to ask you what's going to happen come Saturday when the nation votes, or what both your instincts are about this, please.
Age before beauty, Pete.
That's debatable, John. My instinct at this point is that the National Party will emerge as the largest party. The question then becomes what sort of a government can they put together? And there are a couple of factors that will influence that outcome. One is whether it's New Zealand First and how well they do. The other is if the Greens, for instance, or New Zealand First or whoever doesn't cross the threshold, that waste vote factor will mean that whatever proportion National has got, and Labour too, will be inflated somewhat. So if, for instance, the National Party was to poll 44 or 45%, but both New Zealand First and the Greens miss out, then National could be close to forming a government in its own right with the support of perhaps the Maori Party and ACT. So there are a whole lot of imponderables about this. I do think that as the campaign has gone on, the momentum that was with National at the beginning certainly surged and went away to Labour. I think Labour's handling of the tax argument over the last week or so has started to bring that momentum back. And I think one final thing, that you're starting to see a clear urban-rural divide. And water is the rural talisman that's drawing voters away from Labour, the Greens and New Zealand First, and back to National. A different situation in the urban areas, though.
All right. That's Peter Dunn's take. What's John Tamahatti's?
If the vote turns out, and it's got to turn out, Labour will do very well. If not, National will get the majority vote, but not by a lot. Third parties then will choose the Prime Minister. Okay. Good to have your wisdom today, gentlemen, and a lot of intelligent commentary. Peter Dunn, thank you so much.
Thank you.
John Tamahatti, pleasure to see you, John. That's us for another day, everybody. We are back tomorrow, and Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Kia ora everyone, tonight on Checkpoint, thank you for joining us by the way, Stuart Post, the CEO of Refining New Zealand. I have just spoken to him about the latest on that pipe, what is happening and why it happened, what caused the damage. Also tonight, SaveMart, we've heard so much about that Newland store and the great unhappiness of some of the workers there. Tonight we ask, how reflective is it of the nationwide operation? The earthquake in Mexico, we have the latest from there. The crash on the North Shore in Auckland, Westlake, the latest from there. We have a BBC report on Donald Trump and the North Koreans as the language becomes higher and more absurd, and much, much more. Do stay with us for Checkpoint.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. Air New Zealand's domestic flights are expected to return to close to normal from tomorrow, despite the disruption from the jet fuel crisis. The Energy Minister, Judith Collins, and airline and refinery representatives this afternoon held a news conference near Auckland Airport to update the response to the shortage caused by the ruptured fuel pipeline. The Board of Airline Representatives Director, Justin Tai-Umbers, says airlines are now meeting the 30% fuel allocation and networks are starting to stabilise in terms of delays and cancellations.
Air New Zealand's domestic network is stable as of tomorrow, which means they're not expecting any more cancellations and hopefully running as close to timetable as possible, which is a huge feat on 30% of fuel. International cancellations, they do not expect to be increasing beyond what they are today.
Justin Tai-Umbers, whose board represents 28 of the airlines that fly into New Zealand. Meanwhile, Air New Zealand has lifted restrictions on the sale of long-haul tickets, apart from some Trans-Tasman and Pacific Island services. The airline yesterday announced it was restricting tickets for domestic and overseas flights and stopping all sales on some international services. The only flight cancellation tomorrow is an Auckland to Houston service, bringing the total number of cancelled Air New Zealand flights since Sunday to 41. It could be weeks before the damaged fuel pipeline between Marsden Point and Auckland is operating at full capacity. A fuel industry spokesman, Andrew McNaught, says he expects the pipe to be back at 30% capacity by next Thursday.
The full capacity will be a number of days, if not weeks away. That's why we need to all continue to make sure that we're working closely together, collaboratively, industry, government, various stakeholders, the airport, the airline customers, keeping in close contact, keeping in close collaboration so that we work through this together.
Andrew McNaught says the 30% fuel allocation for airlines is likely to last until next Thursday. Opposition leaders say they're surprised to learn ballot boxes can be taken home for safekeeping overnight by staff at advanced polling booths and are calling for changes to be made. The Electoral Commission says the practice happens only if there's nowhere secure to lock them at the polling venues. Anusha Bradley reports.
The Greens leader, James Shaw, says he's flabbergasted to learn ballot boxes can be taken to staff's homes and says the policy needs to be reviewed. Labour's leader, Jacinda Ardern, was also unaware of the practice and says there must be a better way to secure them rather than at people's homes. The National leader, Bill English, says the Electoral Commission is independent and he won't criticise its procedures. But he says it runs thorough and professional elections and he has no reason to believe it won't be the same this election. Ko Anusha Bradley, aho.
The death toll from this morning's powerful earthquake in Mexico is rising steadily. Nearly 150 people have died in the 7.1 magnitude quake, centred about 120 kilometres south of Mexico City. Rescue teams are searching the rubble for those trapped, and up to 4 million properties are without power. The BBC's James Cook reports.
Across Mexico City and beyond, there is now a desperate struggle to save lives. Rescuers have been pulling survivors and bodies from the rubble, and their work is continuing into the night. More than 20 million people live in the metropolitan area, and the huge tremor sent thousands scrambling into the streets. But the damage extends well beyond Mexico City. The epicenter of the quake was more than 120 kilometers to the southeast in Puebla, and reports of deaths and damage are coming in from several states.
James Cook reporting. Hurricane Maria continues to strengthen as it moves towards the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Already a powerful Category 5, the storm is battering the Caribbean island of Dominica, where all communications are cut. The hurricane's maximum sustained winds have increased to 280 kilometres per hour. Maria is now one of the top 10 most intense hurricanes on record in the Atlantic Basin. Winston Peters says New Zealand First will not support Labour's policies to impose new taxes on farmers or include agriculture in the emissions trading scheme. Labour's proposing to introduce a charge for irrigated water and to include agricultural emissions in the ETS. Mr Peters told more than 100 people attending an Irrigation New Zealand event in Ashburton today the average irrigated farm in that area would be charged up to $29,000 under Labour's plan.
What's wrong about asking farmers to do it alone is that it's absurdly unfair. The biggest pollution's coming from our cities. Everyone knows that. So why don't we all city and town and country, do it all together. All pay the costs, all fix the problem up. Just like Norway does, just like the UK does.
Winston Peters says the National Party is also planning to introduce a charge on water, and he won't support that either. It's 5:05. To sport, and the New Zealand women's footballers have been thumped 5-0 by the United States this afternoon. The match in Cincinnati was goalless for the first 30 minutes before sloppy defending allowed the world champions to take control of the match, running in 5 unanswered goals. Football Ferns coach Tony Redding says he thought the match was closer than the scoreline suggests.
I felt that we were comfortable-ish. You're never comfortable against the world's best team, but they were able to find their platforms. They weren't able to switch as well as they did in the game, and they still switched it well, but not as well as they did. So we was hopeful to go into half-time at 0-0, and then we conceded a sloppy goal, and then one just before half-time was a real killer for us.
The United States won the 2-match series 2-0. New Zealand cricket's been forced to move the second one-dayer between the Black Caps and England in February from Napier's McLean Park to the Bay Oval in Mount Maunganui due to a delay in returfing. The match is being shifted because poor weather affected the supply of new grass. That's the news.
This year's general election is shaping up as one of the most closely fought in years. I'm Guy Espiner. In 2 decades of covering politics, I've never seen an election like it.
Already we've witnessed multiple party leadership changes, polls swinging, but will we see a change of guard in the Beehive? Make sure you join us on election night, September 23rd.
And the following morning, join me, Susie Ferguson and Catherine Ryan for a major wrap-up and reflection on election 17 here on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. For all the North Island areas, mainly fine but isolated showers in Northland, Auckland and the Eastern Ranges. Rain tomorrow morning, then showers, some possibly heavy with thunderstorms from Bay of Plenty to the Central High Country as well as Gisborne to Wairanapa. Nelson, Bulla and Westland, a few showers turning to rain tonight. Rain easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning, some possibly heavy with thunderstorms about the ranges. Marlborough and Canterbury, coastal cloud and isolated showers about the foothills this afternoon. Rain or drizzle developing tomorrow morning, but isolated showers for inland Marlborough. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloud about coastal Otago with patchy drizzle there from evening, turning to showers tomorrow. Fine elsewhere, but early fog tomorrow and isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower. It's coming up to 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you for joining us. Coming up on the programme tonight, Mexico and the rising death toll from its earthquake. Donald Trump in North Korea and the campaign trail and a complaint about Paula Bennett and text messages. Busy programme tonight. Also more on SaveMart. But first, the pipe. I've just spoken to the CEO of Refining New Zealand. He told me that even when the pipeline that's led to a jet fuel crisis in Auckland is repaired, it will only operate at around 70 to 80% of capacity for some time. Airlines flying out of Auckland are likely to have to continue running on just a 30% fuel allocation until Thursday of next week. We discussed a great deal, including his very strong belief that the damage was caused by a digger. There are clear teeth marks on the pipe. I asked him what the digger was doing. He says he doesn't know, but there is a possibility. He says it was indeed looking for swamp kauri. This is Stuart Post, but he also told me that accusations that the pipe had been otherwise damaged, that there had been subsidence in the soil due to heavy rain and there had been a split at a join. He doesn't believe that is true.
We were concerned, and still potentially are concerned, that it has been a very wet winter. So one of the many things we do to make sure that this pipeline is in good nick is we do helicopter flyovers. So we were actually about to do a helicopter flyover to see whether there had been landslips that we had to be concerned about, and sort of we would have followed that up with sort of an intelligent pigging run, which is basically a device you put in the pipeline which tells you whether you have dents or corrosion or other issues.
When did you last do an intelligent pigging run?
We did it in 2014. That's the last one we did.
3 years ago. Is that often enough for a pipe responsible for delivering 2 million litres of jet fuel a day to Auckland?
It's a great question, and we have experts from BP and ExxonMobil on site, and particularly ExxonMobil people are worldwide experts, and they say, yeah, that is about right.
Sorry, forgive me, but they're your shareholders, aren't they?
Well, look, they are a minority shareholder. It's sort of if you're sort of trying that line of inquiry, we've got Worley Parsons engineers from Canada who help us model the pipeline, and sort of it is worldwide. It is an accepted practice that you test sort of de minimis once every 5 years. Having said that, of course, after all of this is over, we're going to sit down and sort of reflect with experts as in whether we should do something differently, yes or no. Sort of, we're modest about it to say, well, actually, let's just look back. This happened. What more could we do? I have to point out, John, that where this happened was 8 meters from very clear signage, 2 signage points saying, there's a gas pipeline under the ground here, and there is a petroleum product pipeline under the ground here. Do not dig. So.
Do you know who was digging?
No, we don't.
There have been, and there are suggestions on social media, very strong suggestions, that people were digging for swamp Cody there. Do you believe that was happening?
I think it could be, but sort of, it's a little bit, we're in that sort of, I mean, there was a person the other day who had absolutely categorically seen that they had been digging there for swamp Cowrie, last weekend. Regrettably, the poor man had the place wrong. So, and that was a New Zealand Herald story. So we need to be really careful in terms of separating fact from fiction.
Okay, can I ask you what Freudian error. Can I ask you what fact do you know about the swamp Cody? Is this something you are investigating? Do you believe digging has been taking place in that area?
I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't know it for a fact. I also don't think that as a professional refinery, I need to go and find that out. I think there'll be an aftermath of council inquiry, potentially insurance, etc. That I won't really have a great involvement in, but I think there will be other people who will be interested to sort of try and draw a line to who did what where. But John, if I can say something, and I am actually genuinely concerned about this. There is such a hunt to try and find who did that. I mean, I think I know one thing for certain about the person who did that, is that person will feel very, very bad at the moment. And I think it behoves media, including you and including what I say, to really think about the mindset of that person. And I hope there is a spouse, a partner, who is actually looking after that person, because this has, for me, a real reminiscence of that very poor truck driver in Taranaki who wiped out a family car and took his own life. So I think it behoves us to be really careful with this person. And as I say, I hope somebody is looking after their well-being.
2 million litres of jet fuel travels from Marsden Point along that pipe every day. You've got about 360,000 being transported by truck, is that right?
I don't know those facts off the top of my head, John, but if you wanted to know them, I can get somebody
I just wonder, are you doing all you can do to get all the fuel you can get from Marsden Point to Auckland?
Yeah, I think we're working very hard. I mean, there's terrific cooperation at the moment between MB, ourselves, and the oil companies to try and put alternative facilities in place. But what you need to remember is that is not so straightforward, because we work with a very hazardous substance. So when you wake up one day and you say, okay, well, I'm going to do it differently, then you need to be really pretty systemic and thoughtful in terms of what you do. Because, look, what has happened is absolutely awful, and we feel very sorry for what has happened in terms of business travel being cancelled, people going on dream holidays being cancelled or postponed. We fully understand the emotional content, and we are deeply sorry. But for instance, with these alternative facilities putting in place, loss of life is just a factor worse, and we need to be really careful with that. So we also get questions about why don't you fix this pipeline quicker? Well, we're actually welding on a pipeline with hydrocarbons in it. So in all these cases, you need time to do it well, and that's also why it's difficult to immediately put alternative facilities in place. We're working it, and we're working it hard.
And once you've worked at it, and you've worked at it hard, will it be back to 100%, or will it operate at a slightly lower capacity for a while?
So when the pipeline comes back, there is actually a protocol under the standards, the international standards that we operate under, that you don't go, okay, that's fixed, let's go back to 100%. You go back to about 70 to 80%. And what you then do is just sort of make sure that your control systems, etc., work. But the other thing that you do is you go back to the intelligent pick where we started, and you do a pick run. You analyze the results to make sure that there aren't other dents that you have missed since you did the last pick run. So we will be running for a while at lower capacity.
That's Sjort Post, who is the CEO of Refining NZ. It's 5:15. While the leaders continue to slog it out on the campaign trail with just 2 more days to go, the National Party Deputy Leader Paula Bennett is at the centre of a complaint over text messages sent by her campaign. The Electoral Commission is investigating the messages sent to 40 Upper Harbour voters, that's in Auckland, in which all their mobile numbers were visible to all recipients. The incident comes as the Commission was forced to defend its policy of allowing advance polling booth staff to take ballot boxes home with them at night for safekeeping if there's nowhere safe to store them. Anusha Bradley is looking at all of this.
The text sent to 140 people last night by Paula Bennett's campaign says,
"Hi, I'm Paula Bennett, your national candidate. I got your number from the electoral roll. National are a strong team. We want to continue to grow New Zealand and take the next step in tackling hard social issues. We know what needs to be done and how to do it. Please support me and the National Party, Paula."
Paula Bennett says in a statement the text was sent by a volunteer as part of her campaign's normal phone and texting of voters.
Unfortunately, one lot went as an iMessage, which means the 40 numbers could be seen. No other names or details were disclosed. We get our numbers from a variety of places over time, including door knocking and canvassing.
One of the text message recipients told RNZ she's never given her number to the National Party. She feels her privacy has been breached and she's complained to the Electoral Commission. And the woman, who didn't want to be identified, says she voted National last election, but after the breach won't be doing the same this time. The Electoral Commission is investigating, pointing out that the electoral roll doesn't list any phone numbers. It wants to assure people that numbers provided to it are not released to anyone. Meanwhile, the Electoral Commission is defending its policy of allowing polling booth staff to take ballot boxes home overnight for safekeeping. This only happens if a venue doesn't have somewhere secure to store them or if there are multiple key holders. It won't say, for security reasons, if it's actually happened this election, but a spokesperson says it takes security very seriously and all ballot boxes are sealed and voting papers tracked. Otago University law professor Andrew Geddes agrees security is robust, but says there are still risks.
Having to transport boxes around the city and then keeping them in people's private homes does sound like it's increasing the risk that ballot boxes may be mislaid or even destroyed simply through things like car accidents, burglaries, a house burning down, for instance. And the problem is once those votes go, there's no way to get them back. And if we have a close election, any votes going missing would, be very problematic.
Labour leader Jacinda Ardern, who cast her advance vote last week, was surprised to learn of the practice.
It does leave some room for error, though, and that may raise some questions in people's minds. I would have thought there would be a better way to secure our ballot boxes.
Greens leader James Shaw is extremely concerned.
I'm absolutely flabbergasted. I mean, the security of the votes is absolutely paramount to the effective running of a democracy and of an election. I would have thought that they would be in a secure location rather than at people's homes. And the fact that nothing's gone wrong so far, I wouldn't say is an indication that nothing will go wrong in the future.
James Shaw says the Electoral Commission needs to review its processes. National leader Bill English says the Commission operates independently and he won't criticise or support what they do.
We have in New Zealand a very thorough and professional way of running elections, and I've got no reason to believe that it won't be the same this time.
And there are plenty of those advance votes to be kept secure. More than 122,000 people cast their vote yesterday, taking the total number to 674,000. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
And we'll have more from the campaign trail after 5:30. At least 149 people are dead following a powerful 7.1 magnitude earthquake in central Mexico, which toppled buildings and left hundreds of office workers trapped. The quake struck just hours after a nationwide earthquake drill to mark the anniversary of the devastating quake in 1985, which claimed more than 5,000 lives. Bridget Burke reports.
Sirens sound after a 7.1 magnitude quake shook Mexico City at lunchtime, collapsing buildings, causing fires and trapping hundreds of people. The quake rocked the central state of Puebla at a depth of 51 kilometres, forcing panicked workers to evacuate buildings. Mike Sellers escaped from the 8th floor of a central city office building.
This is the third time I felt one, and this one is by far the most terrifying one.
Diego Gomez Guzman spoke to Checkpoint from the rooftop of a hospital on the outskirts of Mexico City.
27 buildings that fall down. 2 of these buildings were schools, and there were kids inside too. They're trying to rescue them right now. The Army and the Navy closed the city so they can work with them. Police and firefighters are there as well too. Oh, it was devastating, you know. You can't imagine family, friends being there. Obviously, all the communication fell down. That's kind of scary, not knowing anything. Just knowing that we have an earthquake, that you know that some buildings fall down, that you don't know if your family or friends were there. All the fear in the people, you can feel it when you are going down the street, just walking. Right now on the radio of a firefighter trying to rescue 2 little girls that were trapped under a building that fell down in the center zone of Mexico City. They could see their legs and one of their hands.
Location scout Ricardo Ramos, visiting from Los Angeles, was about to have lunch and told Checkpoint he raced out onto the street.
We had to be extra careful because a lot of the electricity cables were falling, some of the buildings were cracking, and the area where I was at, that's an area where you can really feel them, and a lot of those buildings have collapsed. So we're definitely grateful to be safe.
Can you describe to me what else you saw when the quake hit?
A lot of broken windows, a lot of glass on the floor, some cracks on some buildings, fallen cables, fallen trees. A lot of people trying to figure out what to do. But I think everyone's working very well, being very cooperative. Some people I know are already down there volunteering and offering some water and help.
On the streets, there were chaotic scenes as residents worked with officials scrambling in a race against time to rescue trapped people. Bystanders clapped as one by one people were rescued from crumbled buildings and taken to hospital by ambulance. From the air, as the death toll continues to rise, the extent of the damage was clear. At least 27 buildings have collapsed or partially collapsed. Stunned people lined the streets. Power knocked out to at least 3.8 million homes.
Holy shit. Yeah.
At this cafe at the airport in Mexico City, tourists took refuge under tables as the quake hit. Today's quake struck just hours after thousands of people had participated in earthquake drills throughout the country to mark the anniversary of the devastating quake that killed thousands of people in Mexico City in 1985. It comes less than a fortnight after a powerful 8.1 quake struck on September 7, killing at least 98 people. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
Throughout last week, we looked at SaveMart, a clothing recycling business that donates a percentage of its proceeds to the Child Cancer Foundation and other charities. Those donations are not in dispute, and some have continued for many years, although what percentage they are of the revenue from SaveMart's 31 stores nationwide is not known. We began reporting on a dispute between workers and the company's owner at SaveMart in the Auckland suburb of New Lynn. Workers said they were exposed to health and safety risks as a result of having to search the contents of clothing bins with their bare hands. Faeces, blood, used syringes and sex toys, broken glass. That's some of what the clothing sorters we've spoken to say they found in large bales of donated goods that they go through. The staff in New Lynn who complained were all union members. They now face redundancy. First Union are talking to SaveMart about preventing that. But as we reported on New Lynn, we heard from more and more workers from other SaveMart branches. So does what they have told us support or contradict what we heard from the workers in New Lynn? We asked them.
What SaveMart did you work at?
At Lebanon SaveMart.
And what was your job there?
I was a sorter, manager on the weekends.
Carolyn was in Levin, small town New Zealand, an hour and a quarter north of Wellington, give or take a bit. But since our story about SaveMart in New Lynn, West Auckland, first went to air, we've heard from dozens of current and former workers from throughout the country. Mel, for example, where was she?
The Tauranga branch in Greaton.
Greaton. And Mel's namesake, Melissa?
I was at the Napier store.
New Lynn, Levin, Tauranga, Napier. And Nicole, where did you work?
I worked on the Cranford Street store.
In Christchurch?
Yeah, definitely.
And what was your job?
I was a sorter, but I was able to do every job there.
They're just some of the women we've spoken to, and we've also had written statements from many more, plus Facebook messages, emails and phone messages. In total, Checkpoint has now heard from roughly 50 workers, and it seems not to matter where they are or were, their stories don't vary much at all. Are you able to wear gloves when you are sorting?
No.
So I didn't even finish my
Absolutely
question.
not.
So you are emphatic about that?
Oh, yes. The gloves were never supplied. They were never an option, even if we asked for them, and that was when they said, this is what your job is, this is what you're doing, no, you're not getting gloves and no mask.
Gloves, or the lack of them, are the key complaint. Ever get gloves?
Never.
Location doesn't appear to alter that. That was Levin, this is Napier. Did you wear gloves?
No.
Were you a sorter?
Yes, I was.
Back with Mel in Greaton, Tauranga.
We had no gloves, no masks, nothing. And a couple of the other girls had made noises about finding broken glass and pottery and dirty nappies and syringes and everything that everyone's been saying. And so I voiced my concern to the supervisor as well. And, of course, I was told not to make waves, otherwise my job was on the line.
Gloves are so material because of what gets put in those big blue SaveMart clothing bins with child cancer written on the side. We've heard from workers in New Lynn and from other branches via phone, email and Facebook that faeces and blood are common. But here's what Nicole from Christchurch told me when I asked her, did you wear gloves?
No.
Why not?
Because we were told you weren't allowed to wear gloves because you can't feel if the clothing's damp or the type of fabric, and you just you weren't able to actually kind of feel the fabrics of the clothing, and so you couldn't determine whether it was good enough for the shop or not.
And so you would reach into the bale with your bare hands?
Oh yeah.
And what?
It's a daunting thought.
What did you find in there during your time at SaveMart in Christchurch?
Oh God. Used nappies, soiled clothing, needles, used spoons, syringes, drug paraphernalia, sex toys. I come across half a dead sheep at one stage.
And when you are clearing out, emptying the bale that stuff is in, you are doing it with bare hands because that's
with bare hands.
And you've been told to do it with bare hands.
Yes.
You're absolutely certain about that?
Yes.
Worker after worker is certain about that. The question is, why no gloves? Well, workers tell us that comes down to the sheer quantity of clothes being sorted. Hands are great detection devices. The clothes aren't washed after they're sorted, and they don't want to put wet clothes on the shelves. So ungloved hands alert you to any dampness. Here's Carolyn from Levin, where she never wore gloves.
And we were told not to wear them, but the sheer fact if any of the clothes come in wet that we'd have to put them up on a rail to dry them out. So nothing was ever washed.
Nothing is washed, and
Nope.
you're not allowed to wear gloves because then you wouldn't know the wet stuff.
No, and it wasn't just from being rained on either.
What was it from?
Pretty much from either being urinated on or anything like that was possible. And, you're having to pick people's, I don't understand New Zealand because, people would throw out dirty, filthy undies and, no, not a good look when you're dealing with them with your hands.
So did you ever reach into a bale and touch something that it was simply not appropriate on a health and... Oh, constantly. So what are we talking about?
You name it, we pretty much had it.
So what did they do? A sheep's head, a used sex toy, underwear with faeces or blood, If they found such items in a bale, how would they handle them? Nicole from Papanui in Christchurch.
Try and find the closest plastic bag you can.
And do what with the plastic bag?
Pick it up with a plastic bag.
No gloves?
No gloves, no.
And then, of course, they would go and wash their hands with the hottest water they could manage, when there was hot water. Here's Melissa from Napier.
We had no hot water.
No hot water, even in the bathrooms?
No hot water at all.
Why not?
I don't know.
And what did Melissa find during her sorting? It's the underwear she remembers most of all.
Blood stains, feces.
And you would be reaching in to pick this up with your bare hands?
Yeah.
And when you reached up and picked up some undies with blood or feces in them, obviously you would want to go and wash your hands, but you told me you didn't have hot water to do that with.
No, we had no hot water.
No gloves, no hot water. Melissa said they'd had enough, so...
We joined a union because of our working conditions, and they called in the health and safety person, and he went round and had a look at the conditions and gave Tom a list of things that had to be done to get the place up and running. And in that time, we got made redundant, and he closed the shop for 3 months and rehired new staff.
In Levin, Carolyn and her colleagues went more gently with their complaints about health and safety.
We used to try and have conversations with our boss there, and we were just belittled, and it was like, well, don't say any more.
That was Levin. In Greerton, Mel remembers...
Anyone who even suggested that they might be joining a union was told that if they did that, they would lose their job.
And in Napier, what happened to Melissa, who did join a union and then a short time later lost her job?
It took me a year to get my redundancy pay off him, and I had to do that through legal channels.
Did the legal channels cost you money?
Yes.
So that is just some of the SafeMart workers we've heard from. Checkpoint first went to Tom Doonan, the owner, and Melissa wasn't talking about Tom Doonan there, actually. She was talking about the branch manager, for a response to these accusations 9 days ago. We've gone back repeatedly via phone and email asking and re-asking for an interview. Now, SafeMart's owner has repeatedly declined. He says he doesn't do interviews and has always maintained he does provide gloves. He's emphatic about that. But today we knew he was somewhere at a store in New Lynn where sorters who joined First Union in response to the conditions they say they were working in were last week told they're being made redundant. So we went to see Mr Doonan in person. If you're listening rather than watching, I'm walking into a large storage area at the eastern end of the New Lynn SafeMart premise. Inside, which I filmed on my phone, are bales and bales and bales. To my left, stacked 3 or 4 deep and 6 or 7 high along the wall, are hundreds of them, each weighing up to 80 kilos, sometimes more. There are many more on the far wall and some to my right. But Tom Doonan isn't amongst the bales. He's in the back of the shop. We see him and he sees us. Tom, g'day, John Campbell. Hello, how are you? Would it be possible to have a chat? Been trying very hard to talk to you. Very hard. There is certainly a lot to put to you. Obviously you have the right to not talk to us, but we're very surprised you keep declining our invitations. So we've just tried to talk to the owner, Tom Doonan. He walked away at reasonable speed. We're joined now by Graham McKean from First Union. Graham, you've just had a meeting with Tom Doonan inside. How did that go?
Oh, we had an amiable discussion. Yeah, that was fine.
So what's happening now in terms of the redundancies?
It will continue. I mean, Tom wanted to have some discussion around it, but because the legal team's involved, I've not engaged in that conversation. The point I'd made with Tom was that it was all about a pair of gloves. We should have had this conversation when the first letter appeared on his desktop. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and now we're here with the legal team.
When did the first letter appear on his desktop about those gloves?
So end of April was the first one. I walked into the store, hand-delivered to the manager, no response. A fortnight later, I went to the Onehunga store, hand-delivered another letter to his son, who was in the meeting with us this morning. Again, no response, and through a whole different forms of mediums, letters, emails, phone calls, trying to have this meeting, and it didn't happen. And it's not till this show's come on board that we've now had a discussion, and I covered that with them, and it's just unfortunate.
Who is being made redundant here? Do you understand explicitly and certainly that it is only union members who face redundancy?
That's my understanding. So it is the union members and the union members alone. Those that were segregated last weekend are now being made redundant.
It's Graham McKean from First Union talking to me outside SafeMart. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. We'd love to hear your feedback on any of the subjects we're covering tonight. You can text us 2101. You can tweet us, of course, at Checkpoint RNZ. And our email address, which doesn't change, is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. I think historically late here is Katrina Batten with the headlines.
Air New Zealand's domestic flights are expected to return to close to normal from tomorrow after the disruption caused by the fuel crisis. The airline has also lifted restrictions on the sale of long-haul tickets, apart from some Trans-Tasman and Pacific Island services. The Board of Airline Representatives Director, Justin Umbers, says airlines are now meeting the 30% fuel allocation and networks are starting to stabilise in terms of delays and cancellations. The Army and Navy will start transporting fuel from tomorrow. The tanker HMNZS Endeavour will load up to 4.8 million litres of diesel at Marsden Point Refinery for delivery to ports around the country, freeing up commercial tankers to move jet fuel. 12 Army drivers will also take fuel in civilian tankers from Marsden Point to Auckland and from Wellington to Palmerston North and Napier. In Mexico City, rescuers are battling to find survivors after a 7.1 earthquake struck central Mexico, killing dozens of people and causing multi-storey buildings in the capital to collapse. At least 149 people, including 21 children, have died. Opposition leaders say they're surprised to learn ballot boxes can be taken home for safekeeping overnight by staff at advanced polling booths and are calling for changes to be made. The Electoral Commission says the practice happens only if there's nowhere secure to lock them at the polling venues. Power has been restored to some properties after a cut this afternoon affected about 12,000 properties in Mapua, Richmond, Brightwater and Nelson North. The lines company Network Tasman says it can't confirm it was linked to this afternoon's 5.1 quake near Seddon in Marlborough, but it is likely given the timing. The national grid operator Transpower says it's repairing the fault at its substation in Stoke by reconfiguring the network. Auckland drivers should expect delays as the Onehunga off-ramp on State Highway 20 is closed due to a crash. The police say a car has collided with a pole on Onehunga Mall Road and people should avoid the area if possible. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's head to Wellington now, where our business editor Giles Beckford is standing by with the latest. Hi, Giles. Official figures out today show the country hasn't needed to borrow quite so much.
Good evening to you, John. Yes, it's the second quarter current account or balance of payments numbers. They are a broad measure of how we pay our way in the world. It measures the gap between what we earn overseas and what we borrow, what we owe. And the latest figures show that we had a deficit of around $618 million for the quarter. The annual deficit is just around $7.5 billion. If we take that as a proportion of the value of the economy, that's about 2.8%. Now, years ago, not so long ago, mind you, that deficit was 8 and 9% of GDP. That's the sort of numbers that make Standard & Poor's and Moody's of this world go away and cry in a corner, and then they cut your credit rating and you pay more to borrow overseas. We have the tourism boom and the rebound in dairy exports in particular to thank for the latest improvement. It's still not the greatest, remembering that places such as Japan and Germany run big current account surpluses. That's what gets Donald Trump all of hot and bothered. But for the time being, by New Zealand standards, 2.8% is pretty good. And it means that we're just not borrowing quite so much to finance our lifestyle.
Giles, Japanese office equipment company Fuji Xerox is taking former New Zealand managers to court. This has been fascinating, this saga, hasn't it?
It has indeed. If you remember, these are the New Zealand and Australian operations who, shall we say, engaged in some creative accounting.
Yep.
And that cost Fuji Xerox in Japan, the parent company, more than $350 million over several years. Now, they didn't know about them. They just sort of, quietly emerged, bang. Look what your Antipodean operations have been doing. And it centres on the overstatement of revenue, the way some contracts were written, pricing of contracts as well. It did go right to the top of Fuji Xerox, the chairman of the company. He resigned, as did several other senior executives. A lot of other people there took pay cuts. So they're looking to obviously recover something from their former New Zealand employees. Excuse me. They're not saying what they're wanting, not saying how much they're chasing, nor are they naming the people that they're suing. It's a civil matter. It will in due course emerge through the High Court. But for the time being, Fuji Xerox is still wearing the cost of that because they've been suspended from bidding for new jobs, new contracts for the New Zealand government. So it's not been a happy saga for them.
No, it hasn't been. What happened on the markets today, Giles? I haven't heard anything today.
Our top 50 index for shares, quite strong, up 55 points at 0.7%, 7819. So we were within 70 or so points of record territory. The New Zealand dollar trading sideways, 73.1 US and 91.1 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, thank you. 19 minutes to 6. Let's go back to the campaign trail, where it was a tale of two campaigns today as the National and Labour leaders came to Auckland ahead of their final head-to-head debate tonight. But while they were both canvassing for votes in the country's largest city, Bill English spent his time at big companies like Vodafone and ASB, while Jacinda Ardern headed to a food bank and a union meeting. With a wrap-up of today's political events, here's May Heron.
They say about as fast as they can to get these tens of thousands of houses.
It was a rocky start for Bill English, a visit to Vodafone's Auckland office going awry when a staffer challenged him over child poverty and the environment.
Yeah, no, happy to talk about child poverty. We're going to drop it by 30% on the 1st of April, if you didn't hear. And then another 30% 2 or 3 years later.
From there, Bill English was off to ASB and the law firm Minter Ellison Rudd Watts before heading down Auckland's waterfront. But the national leader insists his campaign's been about far more than just bankers and lawyers.
Visited workplaces, welfare agencies. This is probably the first time I've been in corporate offices, but there's votes there as well. And we are keen to present people with the choice that they are going to be making.
If it was banks for National, it was food banks for Labour.
I'm trying to use my best checkout picking skills. At the minute. Where did you used to be? Oh yeah, I worked at Countdown many years, and the warehouse.
Jacinda Ardern spending time at Mangere Budgeting and Support Services, helping staff put together food parcels to be distributed to needy families. The chief executive, Daryl Evans, telling of one family of 11 who share a two-berth caravan and many others living in garages.
Building developers in this community fit in the garages with TV aerials and plug sockets and phone jack points. That shouldn't be allowed. A garage is for a car, a caravan park is for a caravan and a holiday.
After the visit, Miss Ardern was asked what she thought about the differences between her campaign and Bill English's.
We're certainly focused this election on saying that after 9 years of drift, this community and the families who are using this food bank deserve better.
Jacinda Ardern's next stop was at her first union meeting of some 900 excited members. Greens leader James Shaw was also there, but was well aware he wasn't the main attraction.
Here as the warm-up act for the next Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern.
And during his address, Mr Shaw stressed a change of government is the only way to help people transition into different jobs as technology advances.
The National Party has no plan. This change is coming, and they have no plan, and they risk losing tens of thousands of jobs and leaving tens of thousands of people behind.
Meanwhile, New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters visited farmers in Ashburton today, where he told the crowd his party would not support Labour's policies to impose new taxes on farmers or include agriculture in the emissions trading scheme. At an event organised by Irrigation New Zealand, Mr Peters said the average irrigated farm in that area would be charged up to $29,000 under Labour's plan.
What's wrong about asking farmers to do it alone is that it's absurdly unfair. The biggest pollution's coming from our cities. Everyone knows that. So why don't we all, city and town and country, do it all together? All pay the costs, all fix the problem up. Just like Norway does, just like the UK does.
But all eyes tonight will be back on the National and Labour leaders when they go head-to-head in their final debate at 7 o'clock tonight on TV1. In Auckland for Checkpoint, May Heron.
So just 2 days to go until election day, and on election night I'll be hosting RNZ's televised election night program from this studio right here in Auckland. Jane Patterson and Mihi Narangi Forbes will be with me in the studio. We'll have reporters with all the major party HQs throughout the country and camera crews. You'll be able to watch all of this on Face TV, which is Sky D3, Freeview 50, online in about 200 million different ways. Guy Espiner will be across town at a state-of-the-art studio at the University of Auckland, where he will be unpicking the results and trying to work out what the hell is happening, Guy, with a panel of experts. Who will you have with us, with you there on the night?
Well, that's right, John. I'll be here at the University of Auckland studio. I'm calling it the Situation Room. This is where we're going to crunch the numbers. We're going to have all the analysis. And it won't just be me. There'll be a panel of experts here. I'll run through them for you because there's a few of them. Bryce Edwards, the political scientist, a name that will be well known to many listeners and viewers. Maria Barge and Bridget Morton will also be with us. Also, former ministers and MPs, Clayton Cosgrove, Russell Norman, Tau Henare. He'll be paying special attention to those Māori electorates, which could be crucial on the night. And Stephen Mills, the pollster for the Labour Party and the UMR outfit. So he will be with us. And when they're not here on air, we'll be having them working hard. We'll be pushing them. We'll have them crunching the numbers and have them working on their contacts and networks and getting information from the field too. So we should have it pretty much all covered. I'm doing a flash camera change here. You might be able to see who.
Oh yes, state of the art RNZ.
It's going to be pretty exciting. You see that? Multiple cameras, eh? How's that?
It's fantastic. And also
we haven't got holograms, John,
well,
but we will have graphics.
Yeah, we will have the Electoral Commission's graphics, right, which we are converting to RNZ graphics. You, Guy, are going to be crunching the numbers as they come in, and because there's been so much advance voting, they'll come in very early on the night. So that's going to be absolutely fascinating. Do you have a sense of how it's going, or is it just too tight to call?
You know, I think this one is really, really close and really, really hard to call. You see that in the volatility of the polls. You know, one poll was saying National's well ahead, the other polls are saying Labour's well ahead. It feels a bit like 2005 when you get that real close volatility, people sort of swinging in the wind quite a bit. So I think it is really, really close and too close to call at this stage. You're right about the early voting. Something approaching 50% is the forecast for voting before the election, and those votes are going to be able to be counted from 9 a.m. on election day. So come 7 o'clock, and I know, John, we're on air just before 7, so you know, it won't be one of those times where you're waiting and waiting and waiting for any real news of substance. I think that you are going to get a fairly good indication quite quickly. So my advice to listeners and viewers will be join us early and stick with us.
Guy, I really look forward to working with you. I think it's going to be a fantastic night. Guy Espiner, who is going to be crunching the numbers, doing the analysis and working with that expert panel, RNZ, from 5 to 7 on Saturday night. A young woman is in a critical condition at Auckland Hospital, and 3 other students are recovering from their injuries after a car ploughed into them outside a North Shore high school. 3 students from Westlake Girls High School and 1 from Westlake Boys were struck and injured by the car shortly before the school day was due to start. 1 young woman in a critical condition. Nita Blake-Pearson reports.
The students were standing at a bus stop on Wairo Road in Takapuna when the crash happened around 8:30 this morning. Diversions were put in place while emergency crews worked to assist the injured students, while police later collected backpacks, clothing and school books that lay strewn on the road. Lance Shepherd lives across the road from where the crash happened and says he quickly returned home after his 15-year-old son called to tell him what happened. There he found a blue Nissan Skyline had mounted the curb and narrowly missed the bus stop.
He's just gone up the curb, taken out a pole with the stop sign or bus stop sign, taken out another pole, just missed both bus stops by a foot or so, and then he's just gone straight in, taken out, looks like 6 or 7 panels of pool fencing to stop the kids going down into the Wairau Creek.
Mr Shepherd says the crash happened at a particularly busy time.
I'm surprised that there wasn't a dozen or more students at that point in time, 8:30 in the morning. It's just hectic down here for traffic and obviously students. There's 5,000 students within the 500-metre radius of this incident. It's just really sad to see.
Another local, Simon Hansen, who's lived in the area all his life, says Wairau Road gets a lot more traffic than it used to.
Well, they actually changed this road a couple of years ago, and it was quite a good stretch until they started widening the lanes. When they started widening the lanes, they actually started jamming up more cars than usual, or what it used to be.
Police say 5 people were hit in total, 3 of whom were students at Westlake Girls. A spokeswoman for the school says several students have taken up the school's offer of counselling. She says members of the Ministry of Education's trauma team are helping the school. One of those injured was a Westlake Boys student who the school says is recovering from leg injuries at Auckland Hospital. Students at Westlake Boys are also being offered support. Police say the driver of the car remained at the scene after the crash and was speaking to officers. An investigation into the crash was underway, but police say charges are likely. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Nita Blake-Person, tēnei.
In his first address to the United Nations, the US President Donald Trump has targeted North Korea and Iran as rogue regimes. He indicated that he may be preparing to withdraw from the multi-nation Iran nuclear deal and said the US was ready to totally destroy North Korea if provoked. Before his speech, the UN Secretary-General told ambassadors the world had to avoid sleepwalking into a war over North Korea. The BBC's John Campbell reports from New York.
Donald Trump is used to being the centre of attention, but rarely has the global community waited with such bated breath to hear from him at his first address to the UN General Assembly. The isolationist America First president at the very embodiment of multilateralism and multinationalism. He'd come to hug his friends and wallop US enemies, and none more so than North Korea and their leader Kim Jong-un, or Rocket Man as he called him.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. The United States is ready, willing and able, but hopefully this will not be necessary.
On the Iran nuclear deal, he hinted that America could still walk away from it. You haven't heard the last of this, he warned, calling Tehran a murderous regime. But he ended with a rallying cry for strong sovereign nations working together.
So let this be our mission, and let this be our message to the world. We will fight together, sacrifice together, and stand together for peace, for freedom, for justice, for family, for humanity, and for the Almighty God who made us all. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the nations of the world, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much.
What will stand out from this address will be his comments on North Korea. They're in addition to his warning of fire and fury and weapons being locked and loaded. But there is no simple military solution. For all its shortcomings, the best way to make progress with Pyongyang will be via the United Nations, and the president knows it. Whether this is the most hard-hitting address by a US president ever given to the UN is a moot point. After all, there was half a century of Cold War hostilities. But for sheer unorthodoxy, none has come close to this.
That's the BBC's John Campbell. It's coming up to 6 minutes to 6. Volunteers who run a cafe in one of New Plymouth's poorest neighbourhoods fear it might close down if it's sold to someone who does not support their cause. The Mawhao Community Cafe's lease expires next month, and the building's owner has put it on the market. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter, Robin Martin, has more.
The Together Grow Better Communities Trust set up the cafe about 3 years ago to give the Marfell neighbourhood a focal point and to train locals in hospitality and catering skills. Community action worker Ruth Pista says the cafe is filling an important role in the area.
There is no community centre in Marfell, so this is a place where people can hang out, where people can come in and informally learn a little bit about food handling, about food preparation, storage, and just showing up for work, really.
Ms Pista says the building's sale has been unsettling.
At the moment, we know that we're safely here till the end of October, but we're hoping that it's not going to be sold to somebody who wants to turn it into something that's more of a private venture. Because this is a community hub, we would very much like to think it could continue.
Ms Pfister says many of the volunteers live alone and the cafe offered them valuable social contact and something worthwhile to do. Tracy Edwards is the cafe's fry bread expert, but today she's trying her hand at something a bit different. So explain to me, what have you been doing this morning?
Fried bread and a banana cake. And yo-yos.
And do you do these kind of things all the time?
No, it's the first time ever. I've done a cake for a birthday lady tomorrow.
Is that exciting, coming here and learning new things?
Yeah, I was quite wrapped today. I'm very wrapped.
Ms Edwards is concerned the cafe might close.
Well, really, I was quite shattered when I heard it's gonna close down, but hopefully we can still work on it. I don't know if we can.
Tanisha Rangihayata is a regular customer. She reckons the cafe's great and says it would be a shame if it had to close down. What's so special about this cafe, you think?
Everything. It's got a lot of love, like just everything that they do here is volunteers and a lot of people from the neighbourhood that just comes here and creates this beautiful food that I love to come and eat.
Peter Gunn is the building's owner and originally set up the Together Grow Better Communities Trust. He says the cafe has grown to a point where it needs to stand on its own 2 feet.
They're doing really well. They've set up an excellent community group. They're doing great support work. They've got a social work group working with them. When you're running something like this and you set it up from the bottom, you can stay with them for so long, but then it's pointless us staying there forever and a day when we can carry on and do something else somewhere else.
Mr Gunn says he will only sell the building to someone who is willing to take on the cafe as a going concern. He says he's currently in discussions with at least 2 large philanthropic organisations about a potential purchase. The Trust's current chairman, Andrew Pepper, says it is understanding of Mr Gunn's position and he's confident the cafe will continue in some capacity. In New Plymouth for Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin Tierney.
It's just under 3 minutes. Katrina Batten, you're going to have to walk behind me because I'm going to talk. I've got so much feedback, ladies and gentlemen, if you were watching. I mean, that's the great thing about watching is you get the added bonus of seeing Katrina Batten coming and going from her workstation with a cup of tea and a floral mug. 2.5 minutes to 6. So much feedback tonight. Thank you. Oh my goodness, how disgusting. With the new updated health and safety rules, surely this could not go on. Yes, that's a question we have been asking and we'll update you on the answer in a moment. This is about SaveMart, the story we had at about 5:20. John, I've purchased clothes from SaveMart for work purposes. I always wore gloves and washed the items in hot water and disinfectant as I was very concerned about my health. Says Anthony, hi John, seems like SaveMart not only treats their staff pretty horribly, but the customer experience is terrible too. Filthy dressing rooms with few mirrors, flimsy doors and hooks that are caked in dirt, leaky roofs and no trolleys anymore. How can a business continue in this manner? Hi John, I'm shocked and disgusted to hear about the practices at SaveMart and would boycott them, but realise that would hit the workers hardest. I find the lack of health and safety compliance ironic, given my local store makes a big deal about customers not being allowed to put children in seats in their trolleys due to it being against the Health and Safety Act. Laurie says, as an ex-manager of a transfer station, I would say the decision not to wear gloves is a purely financial one. The other question I would ask is, are their staff offered protective vaccinations, namely hepatitis, etc.? I agree with SaveMart workers' complaints, but who are all the revolting people who are putting all the stuff in the bins? And that is a very good question. It truly is appalling. People saying nice stuff about our journalism. We appreciate it. Thank you, Rachel. Now, lots of people saying, well, what are WorkSafe doing? And of course, we forget that not all of you listen every night. So we have gone to WorkSafe and they are investigating. They have already sent an inspector out to Newland. In fact, we believe an inspector visited twice. There is segregated workers at Newland. The ones who are complaining are the union members who are in a different part of the building to the non-union members. And we've asked WorkSafe, did their inspector get to where the union members are? We believe they did. We've also been speaking with Child Cancer. Their logo, of course, is on the blue bins. Now, Child Cancer doesn't run any of this. They are the recipients of donations from SaveMart. We're not sure what percentage of SaveMart's revenue goes to Child Cancer. They tell us they're hoping to meet with Mr. Doonan soon, and they've concerns about the allegation raised. Child Cancer say it receives roughly $175,000 a year from SaveMart. Kidney Kids is also listed on SaveMart's website as another of the charities that the company supports. It says it's received $50,000 a year for 5 years, but the last donation was in May 2016.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Army and Navy will start transporting diesel around the country tomorrow to help in the jet fuel crisis. The Joint Forces Commander Major General Tim Gall says the tanker HMNZS Endeavour will head to the Marsden Point refinery to pick up 4.8 million litres of diesel for delivery to several ports. General Gall says the Endeavour can take the equivalent of 150 road tankers of fuel, and deploying it will free up commercial tankers to focus on moving aviation fuel. 12 Army drivers will be driving civilian tankers around the clock from this Thursday until Saturday week. 6 of them will be taking tankers from Marsden Point to Auckland, while the others will move fuel from Wellington to Palmerston North and Napier. Meanwhile, Air New Zealand's domestic flights are expected to return to close to normal from tomorrow. The Board of Airline Representatives Director Justin Tai-Umbers says airlines are now meeting the 30% fuel allocation, and networks are starting to stabilise in terms of delays and cancellations. The board represents 28 of the airlines that fly into the country. Air New Zealand today lifted restrictions from the sale of long-haul tickets, apart from some Trans-Tasman and Pacific Island services. The airline yesterday announced it was restricting tickets for domestic and overseas flights and stopping all sales on some international services. The only flight cancellation tomorrow is an Auckland to Houston service, bringing the total number of cancelled Air New Zealand flights since Sunday to 41. Refining New Zealand evacuated 2 families living near its broken pipeline at Ruakaka when the fuel leak was discovered, and it's offering to put up any other neighbours who feel uncomfortable following the incident. The smell of kerosene is still strong at the site 6 days after the break was discovered. The company's fire chief, Damien Southhorn, says the first family lived very close to the broken pipe. They were moved to a motel as soon as the leak was found last Thursday.
They were asleep at the time. They were shift workers. We roused them and we escorted them out. And there was a family up close, young family, mother with a young baby, just to feel a little bit more comfortable. For her to have some peace of mind, we've evacuated her out, and she's also been looked after by Refining NZ.
Damien Southhorn says about 120 people, including a specialist welding team from Taranaki, are now working day and night to fix the fuel pipe. Opposition leaders say they're surprised to learn ballot boxes can be taken home for safekeeping overnight by staff at advanced polling booths, and they want changes to be made. The Electoral Commission says the practice happens only if there's nowhere secure to lock up the boxes at the venues. The Greens leader, James Shaw, says he's flabbergasted to learn they can be taken to staff's homes and the policy needs to be reviewed. Labour's leader Jacinda Ardern was also unaware of the practice and says there must be a better way to secure the boxes rather than at people's homes. The National Party leader Bill English says the Electoral Commission is independent and he won't criticise its procedures, but he says it runs thorough and professional elections and he has no reason to believe it won't be the same this time. Rescuers are pulling bodies and survivors from the rubble of scores of buildings in Mexico City after this morning's powerful earthquake. The death toll is now more than 220, including 21 children and their teachers killed when a school building collapsed. The magnitude 7 quake brought down several multi-storey buildings, damaged many houses and cut electricity to millions. Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto has ordered power generators to be brought in so rescuers can continue their searches through the night. The quake, which comes as the country recovers from a magnitude 8.1 shake less than 2 weeks ago, struck on the anniversary of the 1985 quake that killed an estimated 10,000 Mexicans. Already a powerful Category 5 hurricane, Maria continues to strengthen as it moves towards the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. The storm is battering the Caribbean island of Dominica, where all communications are cut. Maria's maximum sustained winds have increased to 280 kilometres per hour. The BBC's Will Grant is in Puerto Rico.
Whole swathes of the Caribbean have barely had time to draw breath from the last storm before Hurricane Maria started causing fresh devastation. As the storm began to bear down on the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, people boarded up their homes and shut down businesses and schools. The territory's governor, Ricardo Rossello, urged people to take cover with family or friends or in emergency shelters if need be. If you're in a flood zone or wooden housing, he said, your life is in danger.
Will Grant in the Puerto Rico capital, San Juan. Maria is now one of the top 10 most intense hurricanes on record in the Atlantic Basin. It's 6:05. The sport, and the New Zealand women's footballers have lost their two-match series against the United States 2-0 following today's 5-0 drubbing in Cincinnati. The football ferns kept the world champions goalless for the first 30 minutes before their defence fell apart, letting in 5 unanswered goals. The New Zealand cyclist Hamish Bond is refusing to be intimidated by the stars of world cycling as he prepares for tonight's individual time trial at the World Road Champs in Norway. Just a year after winning his second Olympic rowing gold medal, Bond will line up in his first major cycling event up against the likes of 4-time champion Tony Martin of Germany and 4-time Tour de France champion Chris Froome. Bond says he sees it as simply racing against himself.
The good thing about the time trial is that regardless of whether Chris Froome is in it or not, there's nothing that he can do to directly impact my performance or vice versa. So it's not as though I'm trying to follow him up a hill and getting humbled. All I can do is execute my race and then wait till he finishes and see how we compare.
Hamish Bond has spent much of his time based in Norway preparing for this race. That's the news.
Quake shakes Mexico.
I was on the 8th floor of one of the buildings here, and the whole thing just started to shake. And not shake like side to side, but shake up and down.
Trump threatens North Korea.
We will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
Stuck in Samoa.
We're fuel pipe refugees in Apia.
Action Stations Morning Report with Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the Labour Party leader Jacinda Ardern presents her case for leading a change of government. And after 10, poet, writer, teacher, musician and former family court judge John Adams on his new collection of poetry. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow for all North Island areas, mainly fine but isolated showers in Northland, Auckland and the Eastern Ranges. Rain tomorrow morning, then showers, some possibly heavy with thunderstorms from Bay of Plenty to the Central High Country, as well as Gisborne to Wairarapa. Nelson, Buller and Westland, a few showers turning to rain tonight. Rain easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning, some possibly heavy with thunderstorms about the ranges. Marlborough and Canterbury, coastal cloud and isolated showers about the foothills this afternoon. Rain or drizzle developing tomorrow morning, but isolated showers for inland Marlborough. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, cloud about coastal Otago with patchy drizzle there from evening, turning to showers tomorrow. Fine elsewhere, but early fog tomorrow and isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. In the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods with the odd shower. It's just gone 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
And just before we move on, fascinating numbers in the Colmar-Brunton. Gosh, this has been up and down like a yo-yo, this poll. So the Nats are up 6 to 46. This is TVNZ's Colmar-Brunton, just out on One News. The Nats up 6 to 46. Labour down 7 to 37. Remember, it was Colmar-Brunton that first reported that explosive increase in Labour's support. Now back 7 to 37. The Greens up 1 to 8, so well above the threshold. New Zealand First sitting right on it on 5. Bryce Edwards will join us shortly to analyse all of these fascinating numbers. 3 nights out from voting day. But before all of that, it could be weeks before the damaged fuel pipeline between Marsden Point and Auckland is at full capacity, and it's still not known whether jet fuel will be trucked into Auckland. Thousands of travellers have had flights cancelled since the pipe, which runs from Marsden Point to Auckland, burst on Thursday. The government and wider airport industry have formed a group to oversee a return to full jet fuel supplies to Auckland Airport. At a media conference today, the fuel industry said there will be fewer disruptions for travellers in coming days, but it's still unclear when things will be running as normal. Sally Murphy reports.
Those at today's conference say progress is being made, but there's still great uncertainty about when the problem will be resolved. Refinery New Zealand says it's on track to have the pipe repaired and the first load of fuel through to the airport between Sunday and Tuesday next week. The fuel industry spokesman Andrew McNaught says the pipe might only be pumping 30% of normal capacity by next Thursday.
The full capacity will be a number of days, if not weeks away. That's why we need to all continue to make sure that we're working closely together, collaboratively, industry, government, various stakeholders, the airport, the airline customers, keeping in close contact, keeping in close collaboration so that we work through this together.
Airlines are having to ration fuel to just 30% of normal, and that's likely to continue until next Thursday. But there's still a chance that things could get leaner and the rations stricter. Mr McNaught says the newly formed group, which includes fuel companies, Auckland Council, Auckland Airport and several government departments, is still looking at other options.
We are looking at other alternatives to bring supply into the airport, the jet loading facility at Marsden Point, and we're also looking at potentially getting a barge down to Wynyard Wharf. So there's two ways we're managing it, from a demand perspective and also from a supply perspective.
39 flights were cancelled today, a total of 110 since the leak was discovered last Thursday. Head of the Board of Airline Representatives, Justin Tyne Embers, says that's only 5% of total flights. He says bringing in extra aircraft loaded with fuel and having planes refuel in Australia and the Pacific is starting to pay off.
The airlines are now meeting the 30% fuel allocation, and their networks are starting to stabilise in terms of delays and cancellations as they settle into this adjustment. So what that means is for the next few days you can expect to see fewer cancellations and hopefully minimise disruption on the schedules.
These passengers at Auckland International Airport say the disruptions are an annoyance.
Our first flight from Auckland to Dubai is now going to take a lot longer than originally planned because we have to stop off somewhere else to get fuel, which then means we get into Dubai airport later than expected, so we've then missed the original connection back to Manchester.
We've only just found out about it today, so we didn't really have much notice of it. We were expecting at least an email about it.
We just have to stop in Fiji on our way back to San Francisco and refuel, but we may end up getting to the US an hour or two later.
The fuel industry is stressing there is no shortage of petrol or diesel in and around Auckland, as trucking capacity has increased from Mount Maunganui and Wiri into the city. Energy and Resources Minister Judith Collins denied the government has been slow in forming today's group, saying she only learnt about the magnitude of the leak on Saturday. And she says the group's purpose is to focus on the current problem, not to review this leak or come up with future solutions.
Longer term, we need to have a full review of the situation so that some of the suggestions in the past have been around things like dealing with what if there's an outage at Wiri. Actually, they weren't anticipating an outage further up the line. So it's looking at how we can do it better. I've previously stated that I believe we need to look to storage more in Auckland or around Auckland.
She says the group will work around the clock until the pipe is fixed and everything's back to normal. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
More than 100 people are now working around the clock on a soggy Ruakaka farm site to fix the broken fuel pipe. Our Northland reporter Lois Williams went to the site this afternoon. There are big pits everywhere filling with water, pumps going, heavy machinery excavating around the pipeline. If you're watching, you can see from the photos that the pipe, which is 2.4 metres deep, was only metres away from these yellow signs that clearly say, "Do not dig," and buried high-pressure oil pipeline buried below. It's pretty explicit. The refineries brought in a specialist welding team from Taranaki to do the hazardous job of making the pipe safe, cutting out the damaged bit and welding in a new piece in a pipeline that's been full of kerosene and volatile gases. Lois spoke to the refinery fire chief, Damien Southwarn.
We've isolated the fuel line and made safe by pumping out the hydrocarbons. So it's gone from a hydrocarbon threat now to a concurrent working threat with excavations going on, bearing in mind we've still got a live gas line running next to it.
It all sounds pretty risky, pretty scary.
Look, these are professionals. These guys work in oil and gas all the time. It's their job, it's their bread and butter. As I said, they're wearing their hearts on their sleeves, but they also are very proactive and very safe about it's methodical. And that's what's taking the time. It's about the planning, the preparation, the permitry, the safety plans. All that has to be done, has to be agreed to before we get into it.
You've just got to make sure that there's absolutely nothing that could explode.
Oh, for sure. And there's never, I mean, we've got, as I said before, we've got these little orange gas monitors around the plant. Guys are wearing personal gas alarms, so if they get any sort of high explosive limits around them, they squawk at the very low end. Before it's even dangerous, at that point we would evacuate. We haven't had that throughout this whole operation. None of these alarms have gone off. And then we've got the obviously just the fumes, and our guys have to wear, our guys and girls have to wear full masks.
It's a pretty strong smell, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I suppose if you're not used to the oil and gas industry, it is. But yeah, but you're right, and that's something we have to think of.
Yeah, you've evacuated a couple of families from the neighbourhood. Haven't you?
Yeah, the first family evacuated was sort of 100 metres north of the leak.
That's the little house over behind.
That's the little house over behind, and we evacuated on. When we arrived on scene here last Thursday in an emergency response, that was done very, very quickly. They were asleep at the time. They were shift workers. We roused them and we escorted them out. So they're being looked after by Refining NZ in motel accommodation. And there was a family up close out of the perimeter, young family, mother with a young baby. Just to feel a little bit more comfortable, we felt it for her to have some peace of mind. We've evacuated her out, and she's also been looked after by Refining NZ.
So that is the recovery and the repair operation in the field. Meanwhile, the jet fuel shortage is outside the airline's control, so they're not obligated to compensate anyone for extra costs incurred as a result of this crisis. Air New Zealand and Jetstar have both been rescheduling passengers, but unless you booked your travel insurance before last Sunday, you won't be covered for any extra costs. Our reporter Zach Fleming spoke to Insurance Council Chief Executive Tim Grafton.
It always depends on what your policy says, but generally speaking, if you've suffered additional costs or losses as a result of the jet fuel problem that's affecting the airline industry, then once you've gone to your airline or your booking agent, and if they have fixed your arrangements for you and you've incurred additional cost, then generally speaking, your travel insurance would kick in.
If I tried to be cheeky and got travel insurance after the first media story broke, what situation would I be in?
Well, if you would certainly be able to purchase travel insurance, but you would not have been covered for any additional costs or losses arising from the jet fuel crisis that's hit the airline industry. So it's a bit like trying to make a claim for your house burning down. Trying to buy insurance whilst your house is burning down. Obviously, you can't do that. So typically, insurers will apply an exclusion for when an event was generally known in the media, and you could reasonably expect that people would know about the situation, which generally insurers are marking as 10 a.m. Last Sunday.
So it's that reasonably expect clause, right? Because there have been those couple of stories where the refinery posted on Facebook that there was a slight problem, but because it wasn't out in the media and it wasn't general common knowledge, you know, most people were probably going to be fine, aren't they?
Well, the Facebook communication from the refinery, I understand, might have been on Thursday afternoon, and that certainly gave no indication that there would be flight cancellations for days afterwards. So the known flight cancellation and disruption started to emerge on Sunday morning, and that would be the time that you would reasonably expect people to know that their flight cancellations might lead to additional costs, and then to purchase insurance to cover those costs, that would be the exclusion point, generally speaking.
Tim Grafton talking to our reporter Zach Fleming. 6:18. Let's return to that Colmar-Brunton poll that One News led with tonight at 6 o'clock. The National Party has surged in it. It's 9 points ahead of Labour just 3 days out from the election. The One News Colmar-Brunton poll found support for National rose 6 points to 46%, while Labour fell 7 to 37. Neither party would have enough support to govern alone. New Zealand First fell 1 point to 5%. Now that's the MMP threshold. You either have to win a seat or get 5% of the party vote to get into Parliament. The Green Party has continued its recovery, polling at 8% now in the Colmar-Brunton. Joining us now is political scientist and commentator Dr. Bryce Edwards, who will also be joining RNZ on election night as well as part of that excellent panel Guyan was talking about before. Bryce, are you there?
I am, John.
I think the last time I spoke to you after a poll, although I've got a mind like a sieve at the moment, but I think the last time I spoke to you after a poll was the first Colmar-Brunton, where the Labour had just gone kapow, up like a rocket, and we were all going, holy moly, now Labour down 7 and National up 6.
It just keeps happening. We have talked about this before in terms of the extraordinary volatility in the electorate at the moment. It just keeps on going up and down like a yo-yo, and I'm not sure that the polls are incorrect. They just are measuring the fact that people are changing their minds. They are, it's just such a crazy campaign.
It is a crazy campaign, and the RNZ poll of polls has got them very, very tight. I also have been talking to, people in both parties, and they say their internal polling has them very, very tight, although that's a convenient narrative for them to run, right, because they need turnout.
Well, I mean, you do always have to remember under MMP that you have to at least add Labour and the Greens together, and that shows you how tight it is, because, of course, we have on this Colmar-Brunton poll, National on 46, but when you add Labour and the Greens together, they're on 45. So, it's tight looking at it that way as well.
Yeah, it is. What's worked for National and not worked for Labour? Is it the Joyce-led attack, that $11.7 billion figure, which was preposterous, disingenuous and wrong? Yeah. But at a dark arts, it's the Machiavellian strategy, isn't it? That you just taint your opponent any way you can, really.
Yeah, you throw a bit of mud and you see what sticks. But I mean, you have to admit. Well, I think that National did challenge Labour on some other elements of their fiscal policy, which were a bit, questionable, especially the issue about the tax working group and the fact that Labour might bring in some big changes that they wouldn't be campaigning on, and they have had to do that, back down on that. And that did look a bit weak on Labour's part. So I just think overall on fiscal policy, Labour haven't had a good week, whether they deserve it or not, and that would unsettle a lot of voters, especially undecided voters.
Yes, yes.
I'm not surprised by this result.
You're not surprised by it?
Well, I'm surprised by the extent of it, put it that way, because I would never have thought that National would be back up to 46 after Colmar-Brunton had them, back down at, what was it, last one? I think it was 39. It is extraordinary to have such a recovery.
Yeah, you're quite right. They're up 6. So they're at 39 or 40. It's absolutely fascinating, because what matters now is who turns out. So we know that historically high levels of people are voting early, but they are people who obviously, I'm sorry to even say this aloud, have made their minds up. It's the people who are going to vote at the last moment who are still clearly thinking about it. Now, if some of them don't bother to turn out, and if they are young people and the people who are yet to enrol, then Labour is in real trouble, aren't they?
Absolutely. Labour are really pushing their Get Out the Vote campaign at the moment. So they have a huge machine that will be telephoning everyone that they have on their database, really offering people trips to the polling booths on Saturday, and that will have to work exceptionally well. I believe the Greens are in quite a similar situation. For the first time, they've actually got a decent machine operating this week and on election day, because they know that their supporters are less reliable, shall we say. So that youth vote in particular has to be mobilised if there's going to be a change of government.
We had Jacinda Ardern on the programme last night. It was a fascinating interview, and one of the things we discussed was Was it naive to go to the market, i.e. the electorate, i.e. the country, with an unformulated tax policy, the possibility of things, and hope that the Nats wouldn't do precisely what they did do, which was read the tea leaves in a disingenuous and self-serving fashion?
And what did she say?
Well, yeah, well, she
Did she have a good answer?
I think they probably do. What she said is, we listened. And we said that the result of the tax working group recommendations would not be implemented until we took it to the electorate in 2020. So she didn't say it was naive, but she did say she'd listened.
Okay. I mean, one of the things she could have said is we are just doing the same thing that National did in 2008.
True.
Because that's true. In 2008, National had a very vague manifesto they took to the electorate, and they promised working groups as well. And they implemented various changes in taxation without signalling before the election. But I just think it's a bit sad if Labor is trying to win an election in the same way. They have had 9 years to come up with some robust policy. I think it's unfortunate that in the last week they suddenly, have to flip-flop on that. They should have been able to come up with something better on capital gains.
Gosh, it's going to be fascinating, isn't it? Saturday night, Bryce. You'll be with Guyan across at the University of Auckland in their flash studio, very much part of RNZ's coverage.
I'm really looking forward to it. It might not be as flashy as maybe some of the TV coverage is, but I think it will have more substance. We won't have any ads. We'll have a lot more of the facts, a lot more analysis, and less of the sort of light shows and fancy graphics.
Dr. Bryce Edwards, political scientist and commentator, joining us live then for the latest on this Colmar Brunton, and joining us live on Saturday night. Thanks, Bryce. Just before we go on, if you've just hopped into your car and you're driving home, or just arrived home and turned on the radio in the kitchen, National 46, up 6, Labor 37, down 7. The Greens well above the threshold now at 8, and New Zealand First on the threshold at 5. That's the latest Colmar Brunton poll. Let's go back to Mexico now, where they have, 220 dead people in the earthquake, and that death toll is rising fast. The 7.1 magnitude quake struck central Mexico, causing dozens of buildings to collapse in the capital, Mexico City, where 2 million people were left without electricity. The country is prone to earthquakes, of course. Earlier this month, an 8.1 magnitude tremor in the south left at least 90 people dead. This from the BBC's James Cook.
Across Mexico City and beyond, there is now a desperate struggle to save lives. In the minutes after the earthquake, columns of dust rose into the air, hinting at the devastation. Mexico City is one of the most densely packed places on Earth. More than 20 million people live in the metropolitan area, and the huge tremor prompted panic when it struck around lunchtime. Civil servant Pedro Cruz Martinez described it as a huge quake.
Awful. I think it was one of the strongest we have felt. I don't know what magnitude, but it was terrible.
The president of Mexico, Enrique Peña Nieto, says 27 buildings have collapsed in the capital alone. Natasha Pizzi, who's a reporter in Mexico City, is near one multi-story building that was brought down, where rescue workers are trying to reach survivors.
People are physically grabbing rubble with their hands, passing it down human chains. Others have pinched shopping trolleys from a local supermarket and are trying to rush rubble away from the scene like that. It's very frightening. Every so often we're told to step back because of fears of a gas leak.
And it's clear that the damage goes well beyond Mexico City. The epicenter of the earthquake was actually more than 70 miles to the southeast in Puebla, and there are widespread reports of deaths and damage. Earthquake alarms did sound, but some residents apparently thought they were part of a day of drills on the anniversary of a devastating quake which killed thousands of people in Mexico City in 1985. Now, the 19th of September will be remembered for two disasters.
The BBC's James Cook reporting. Meanwhile, already a powerful Category 5 Hurricane Maria continues to strengthen. So it's already 5 as it moves towards the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. The storm is battering the Caribbean island of Dominica, where all communications are currently cut. The US National Hurricane Centre says maximum sustained winds in the storm have increased to 280 kilometres per hour. This is charting straight back over where Irma went. The BBC's Will Grant is in Puerto Rico.
And apparently suffered some of the worst of the damage. The country's Prime Minister, Roosevelt Skerrit, described the situation as it was unfolding on his Facebook page, calling the damage mind-boggling. As the storm began to bear down on the US Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, people boarded up their homes and shut down businesses and schools. The territory's governor, Ricardo Rossello, urged people to take cover with family or friends or in emergency shelters if need be. If you're in a flood zone or wooden housing, he said, your life is in danger. Around 60,000 people in Puerto Rico are still without power after Irma hit a week ago. At the time, people here largely breathed a collective sigh of relief. This time, though, many fear the impact will be far more significant.
The vast majority of people are now just hunkered down and hoping that this, the most powerful storm to strike the island in almost 100 years, doesn't bring too much devastation with it.
That report from the BBC's Will Grant. Lots of feedback tonight. Thank you so much. We really enjoy hearing from you. Tom says, NZ Refining, Auckland Airports, Air New Zealand and insurance companies are companies listed on the stock exchange. No taxpayers' money should be spent on sorting out their fuel problems. Welcome to the market economy, says Tom. You might want to check why every major airport worldwide has large fuel storage tanks in case something goes wrong. So why not Auckland? No other major airport relies on a pipe. This is a private enterprise stuff-up. Look, Auckland does have tanks. There's also big tanks at Worry, but they don't seem to have been full to capacity. We'll look more at that. Thank you for that feedback. And questions the airlines. Is the amount of fuel they carry as a contingency margin compromised in any way as a result of the fuel shortages? Good question, Tony. We'll check up on that too. That's Checkpoint for tonight.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Navy and Army will start transporting diesel and jet fuel tomorrow to help in the fuel crisis, though Air New Zealand domestic flights are expected to return to close to normal from tomorrow. National has overtaken Labour in the latest One News Colmar Brunton poll, up 6 points to 46%. Labour has dropped 7 points to 37%, while the Greens are up 1 to 8%. Rescuers are pulling bodies and survivors from the rubble of scores of buildings in Mexico City after the 7.1 quake. And power should be back on to the 12,000 properties hit by a transpower fault in the Nelson region. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Coleman Hawkins is the man this week on Inside Out. I'll be checking out some of his greatest recordings, along with new tracks from Bruce Brown, some Jerry Allen and some Paul Bley.